Welcome, welcome. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the Wealth Movement. And you are listening in to the 5th of 5 interviews with Chris Thomson about the inner cosmos. And if you get an opportunity to go through the other 4, which both of us hope that's what's happening, if not, number 5 is going to give you some really great insights and ideas to work with, because Chris is going to reveal more insights about being fully human and being natural. And we're just going to use a bit of a summary exploration kind of conversation again, as we've done in the other 4. So Chris, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you about where you'd like to go with this being fully human, being natural. Let's find a way to move through this. So where would you like to start?
Well, the inner cosmos is just a way of expressing something. It expresses the idea that because we are part of bigger things, so we're part of humanity, okay? We're part of nature, we're part of this planet. Because we're part of bigger things, the essence of those bigger things is somehow contained in us. And the idea I'm proposing is the bigger the thing outside us, the more deeply it is inside us. So we're part of the cosmos, which is the biggest possible thing. And its essence, therefore, is right at the very core of us. Okay, it's invisible, we can't see it. It's deeply inside us. People have called it the divine spark.
Okay.
And as the things get smaller, like a galaxy or a solar system, within our inner cosmos, that they're bigger and more apparent. Okay. And at the most apparent level, we are individuals. So you're Steve, I'm Chris, and everyone is evidently who they are. That's the most apparent level. The next most evident level, okay, slightly less visible, is we're all humans. That's obvious, okay? A bit less obvious, sort of deeper in our inner cosmos, is we're all part of nature. In other words, we are living beings. Nature is the whole of life. At a less evident level still, we're part of this planet, and so it goes on. So you can visualize the inner cosmos as like Russian dolls getting smaller and smaller. And the smaller the doll, the bigger the thing it relates to outside us. So there's an inverse relationship.
Okay.
You asked about being human and being natural. I chose these because these are the 2 parts of our inner cosmos closest to the surface. They're the easiest to become aware of, to become conscious of. And in my experience, a very effective way of revealing them, if you like, what they are, is to be them. It is to become what they are. So being human, being natural with a capital N.
Which is which was in a little bit different relationship to what we talked about in number 4. And I was suggesting some people are looking for the doing fully human and doing natural, and you're talking about this being. Can you just explain just a little bit more about what you mean by being?
I think you have to be before you can do. And I've always believed that, you know, for a long, long time, since I was a teenager, in fact. I've noticed, and I was no exception, that I wanted to rush into doing something, okay? Before I even thought about it, I'd rush into action. And you'd agree with me, Steve, we live in an action-orientated world where people say, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And more often than not, the best thing to do is not to do. The best thing is to step back and wait and reflect, and that's often true. There are exceptions in emergencies where you have to act very quickly, obviously, okay? Clearly. But I would say that in most cases, it's better to be first before you do. I'll give an example. I'm very interested in Taoism. Okay? And people might say, how do you do Taoism? And the answer is, I don't know. But I might know if I became a Taoist. So the first stage is being a Taoist, okay? That's why I emphasize the being rather than the doing. So what does it mean? You might ask me this, what does it mean to be fully human? And what does it mean to be natural? These for me are the two key questions.
And just before we dive into that, we've talked about, you're starting to explore this Taoism from a perspective of how might I assist others in learning a little bit more about it, because people have different views of what this Taoism is about, but you're actually exploring that to look at creating some material, could be books and courses and all that, to be able to assist others in that learning. We've talked about it. Do you want to just very briefly acknowledge that storyline for you right now?
Sure, because anyone listening to this should know that, you and I will continue this series weekly starting next week. And if we have to miss something out this week, that doesn't matter, okay? So we can go into being fully human and being natural at a later stage if necessary. That's no problem. Yeah, I mean, people probably know the book, the Tao Te Ching, which literally means the natural way, the human way, and the word Jing is the Chinese word for book. It's an old word, okay? So it's about the tension. The book's about the tension between nature and naturalness on the one hand, that's the Tao, and the De is humanness. Okay? And the whole book's about trying to resolve that tension between being human and being natural. So it's a wonderful way of getting into what we started discussing. In other words, being fully human and being natural, okay? And the Tao Te Ching tries to resolve that. For those that don't know, no one knows who wrote the book. People say, oh, but wasn't it Lao Tzu? Well, Lao Tzu is the Chinese word for the old geezer, or the old guy. That's all it means. No one knows who wrote the book, okay? So no one knows. And it's one of the most translated books in the world, as it happens. I know of more than 300 translations in English. And they're all different. In fact, you could read some and not realize that others were about the same book.
Okay.
Okay? And that's because it's written in classical Chinese, which is like a code. It's very condensed, and you have to unpick it the way it's written. So they say a lot in a very few words. As I said, I'm interested in it. I've been interested in it since the 60s. As a wee aside, the first version I read was by a Chinese scholar called D.C. Lau. And he turned out to be my future wife's godfather in one of life's odd coincidences.
Well, that's great, because that.
So yes.
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that's why I'm interested in the Tao now, because it seems to encapsulate what we're talking about.
Yes. And I think we'll explore that again in another part of the series. And I just wanted to acknowledge that you're interested in, you're exploring it, and that wonderful story about the relationship, sort of from a coincidence point of view. Coincidence point of view? Yeah, okay. Kind of idea is there. But let's go back to this, the sense of being fully human and being natural. So let's look at revealing a little bit more about being fully human. What would you like to share with us now?
It's not an easy one to get into, okay? Because it could mean so many things. The tack that I've taken, the approach I've taken, is to look at other creatures and to say, they are fully who they are. If you see a wolf or a dolphin or an eagle or a falcon, it is very clear when you see them, okay? They are fully who they are. They're not half wolf or 3/4 wolf, all right? And when we think about their nature, like a wolf nature, what do we mean by wolf nature or dolphin nature or eagle nature? We have a sense that it's a kind of perfection, okay? That they are somehow perfect. And when we talk about the word human nature, the contrast couldn't be greater, Steve.
Yeah.
Because for many of us, the term human nature seems to mean the opposite. It seems to mean a kind of imperfection. It's human nature to be imperfect. It's human nature to make mistakes, and so on and so on. I'm sure you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But if all these other creatures, the wolves, the eagles, the dolphins, the salmon, any creature at all, any creature, was as imperfect as we are and made mistakes on the scale that we do, they wouldn't last very long at all, okay? So it raises the question, it raises a very big question. Why is it we human beings make ourselves the sole exception in the world of nature, okay? And I kind of leave that open. It's a big question to ponder. I don't want to even think about addressing it just now. So all I want to do at this moment is to contrast us as human beings with the rest of nature, okay? Because the rest of nature is somehow fully formed. Each form of life in the world of nature is perfect in itself, okay? So apart from the old or the sick, they're in perfect health. And many of us can say that about ourselves. They act intelligently within the limits of who they are. They act wisely and intelligently. Can we say that about ourselves? They act ecologically within the rules of nature. Do we? I think not. They have what I call personal power, by which I mean they can survive in difficult situations where we wouldn't survive, okay? What I mean is we've become so used to the comforts of technology, including having houses and fires and supermarkets, all that, okay? They don't have that. We're the only species on the planet that has that. So they have this personal power, okay? And above all, they're natural. Now, I know the word natural is difficult to define, but we recognize natural when we see it. When I see this valley where I am in the Pyrenees is full of kites. I mean the birds. They're not as big as eagles, but they're bigger than hawks, okay? And they are acrobats, wonderful flyers, okay? And I see them on a daily basis. And I say, how do they manage that? This perfection, this ability. They do things so well. And that's the approach I'm taking, is to try and contrast the way we are with our imperfections with the way they are, okay? And to say, what is it we would need to do? So I'm using the word do now, to kind of iron out these imperfections and get into perfect health. Act wisely, have personal power, and be natural. These are the 4 qualities that we identified.
Well, there's a phrase that I use. There's being in the world, and then there's being for the world. And I'm thinking that you are suggesting is that you can be in the world and being fully human and being natural but being for the world, and sort of taking it that next step of contribution and reflection and being here. Because I've always appreciated in our conversations when you talk about, you know, a wolf's a wolf, right? A salmon's a salmon, a sloth's a sloth, and humans are, oh, hang on a minute, what's going on here kind of idea. And I've shared that many times with people. And then I sort of add, you know, being the best for the world, that our language is so important to our being natural, being fully human. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is a bit of at a tangent, okay, so forgive me for not answering it directly. So I've run small courses on being fully human, okay, for small numbers of people. And I focused on three things, only three things. And people have found this very useful, okay? And the three headings I focused on are the real you, the whole of you, and the best of you. And in that order, okay? So the first thing is to discover who you really are. And that's not easy. That might involve some soul searching, you know, and some discomfort. In fact, it often involves much discomfort, you know, discovering who you really are. And there are many questions implied in that, like your purpose in life, your path in life, and so on, okay? And that's number one, you know, who are you really, okay? And then number two is kind of revealing the whole of you, not just the parts you reveal at work, or the parts you reveal in public, or even the parts you reveal to yourself. But I mean, what is the whole of you? You know, what parts are you not addressing or aware of? And there's much in that to discover the whole of you, okay? And then the third thing is the best of you, and that's kind of plays to what you just asked me about going out into the world, okay? Because let's assume that this is the real you. You found out who the real you is. Let's assume you've begun to open up and discover more of you, heading towards the whole of you. Let's assume you've done both of that, or at least you're in process, okay? The next thing, because these things, although they're consecutive, they're not exclusive. In other words, you begin 2 without finishing 1. You begin 3 without finishing 2 and 1, okay? So that they go together. And the best of you is really what education's about. We discussed that, I think, yesterday. And education is about trying to get the best of you out into the world, you know? So Stephen, you are obviously unique. There are no other Stephens. There never will be. There never will be. And when the more you think about that, there never will be, that kind of imposes upon you almost a duty to be as much the Stephen who you are as you can be, okay? And to bring the best into the world, because the world will never again have that chance to be met by the best of Stephen. And that applies to everyone. Everyone, you know, everyone's unique. And in my view, everyone has a duty, an obligation to bring out that uniqueness into the world. It's like giving a gift, you know, because you're unique, and I'm unique, and everyone listening to this is unique, you know, they're giving something that no others can give. And they have to find a way of doing that. In some people, it's kind of obvious. They play the piano very, very well, okay? Or they paint very, very well, or they invent electric cars, okay? That kind of thing. Or they invent kind of online bookshops, which where you can buy books online and they'll deliver you to your doorstep. So in some cases, it's obvious what they're contributing. In other cases, it's not. It might be quite local and quite modest. Even if it's just local and modest, it's still important. The world needs your contribution. Just to recap, being fully human, the real you, the whole of you, and the best of you. And I would settle for that.
So if you take the expansion and move into now being natural from what you've just shared, because I'm sitting here thinking, wow, that would be like a really great workshop that you just shared, and being able to dig into it. I was just seeing possibilities. So thank you for that. And even being able to share some of that with the people that I know and that I love and care for, it would be great. So I'm thinking that being natural, by adding a little bit more about being natural to what you've just shared, is going to be very useful. So where are we going with the being natural now?
There's a very nice link, as there should be, I think, between being fully human and being natural. And the link is this. I think it's our nature to be fully human. So I've used the word nature, okay, as in natural. And I'll go further and say, this is based on my experience and on the experience of people I've worked with, that the more fully human you are, the more likely it is that you're natural. I think the two go hand in hand, okay? So going back to the Tao Te Ching and Taoism, as I said, the book is mainly about this creative tension between being human and being natural, okay? Being part of humanity on the one hand, and being part of nature on the other hand, okay? And the whole thrust of the Tao Te Ching is to try and reconcile the two. And I think the two can be reconciled by beginning with being fully human. And the more you work on that, the more likely it is that you'll end up being natural. But I mean, if people aren't sure what natural is, I would say, get up, get out, go outside, stare at a tree, stare at the sky. If there's water nearby, stare at the water. Okay, stare at nature. And, if it's still not evident what natural is, keep staring. Keep looking until it's obvious. So I'll give an example. I forget who said it. I think it was Heraclitus, the Greek. That you can't step in the same river twice, okay? Something along those lines.
Yeah.
But because the water's always flowing. And if you lived here, the clouds are constantly changing. So apart from those cloudless skies, the sky is never the same. If you were to observe a tree closely, spend days and weeks observing it, you would note it's never the same. It's constantly changing. And I think, in a way, that's touching on the essence of nature, which is constantly moving, always on the move, always changing, okay? And you could kind of take those two words, moving and changing, and you could add a value proposition to them. You could say they're growing, they're evolving, they're improving, okay? So moving and changing are quite neutral concepts, whereas growing, improving, evolving are not neutral. They imply a movement towards something, okay? Something different, something better. And for me, nature is constantly sending out that message, you know, of moving, changing towards something better, evolving. So in a way, you could say that the world of nature is a mirror for us. It's a mirror for our own growth, for our own evolution, for our own change.
So when you connect it, there's got to be something about intelligence there. There's got to be some kind of connection with intelligence, because there's the intelligence of being fully human and the intelligence of nature and being in contact with that nature. And I know you've written a book about intelligence and speaking about the different elements of that. Can you just connect through this intelligence piece? And I know you've used simplicity. We've talked about intelligent simplicity. So there's got to be something in there that makes this, weave this kind of connection. Can you go there for us right now?
I think water is a good example. So water always flows downwards. And here's the key, always takes the easiest route, the simplest route. If you're not sure about that, go and observe some mountain streams, okay? Or some rivers. You'll see what I mean. Always takes the simplest route. Now that's true of water, and in a way it's a very evident example. But I think it's also true of everything else in nature. That everything takes the simplest route. Difficult to explain in a very short time, so I won't even attempt to, okay? But the idea I've become fond of, it's not my idea, I got it from Alan Watts, okay, in a book, I think, called The Wisdom of Insecurity, but I'll check that for you, Alan Watts. He talked about the law of reverse effort. What he meant by that was that what happens in nature is for the minimum input of energy, of effort, you get the optimum output. I used to climb a lot, and I used to teach judo 40 years ago. And in both of these sports, the law of reverse effort, very important. Judo is a Japanese word meaning the gentle way, the soft way. And although when you see judo on television, it seems to be grunt and pull, that's not real judo. I had some Japanese visitors at one time, you know, experts, real top people, way above black belt. They had red belts. And it was almost like magic. You would try and throw them. Next thing you knew, you were on the ground. And you had the sense they'd done nothing. And I got to know a Japanese guy who was over for a year, a guy called Kunimitsu. We used to go for a pint of beer afterwards. And he was smaller than me by a mile. And he always beat me. And I used to say, come on, how is it? Tell me, come on. You're half my size. How is it you beat me? And he said something which has stuck with me for the rest of my life. He says, you try too hard, Chris. You try too hard. And because you try too hard, I use your trying to throw you. I use your energy to throw you. I don't do anything. I just assist you in throwing yourself. And that's kind of the law of reverse effort, okay? If you get time, a very quick one. I was climbing Mont Blanc with a friend. You leave a refuge at about 11,000 feet at midnight. And with head torches, you climb to the summit, which is about 5,000 feet higher. And we were quite fit 30 years ago, going quite fast, ahead of everyone else. And at one point, I noticed a line of head torches catching up with us, even though we were going fast. It didn't make any sense at all, Steve. And eventually, this line caught up with us. And it was an old French guy in his 70s, one of the Chamonix guides. And I got chatting with him. And I said, how the hell did you catch us up? And he said, you were going too fast. Which in a way doesn't make sense, okay? But because I had the judo story in my head, basically what he was doing judo on the mountain. So he was kind of going slower, but effectively going faster. He was using less effort to get a better output. So this is a long-winded way of saying, I think this is what nature does. And because nature does that, it's very ecological. It's very sparing with its own resources, okay? It uses its own resources very carefully, very sparingly to get the best results. As I said earlier, we make ourselves the sole exception. You know, look at the plastic waste in the sea. Look at the amount of food thrown out every day by supermarkets. It's approximately 1/3, Steve, waste. No other species on this planet does that. And I think that's because they're natural, meaning that's because they unconsciously, or maybe consciously, apply the law of reverse effort. They're economical. As you well know, I've written about this under the title of Less is Better, but we can discuss that another time.
Sure, for sure. The intelligence aspect. So there's an intelligence of nature. There's the intelligence of humanity. There's the intelligence of you. And I'm thinking the alignment, we talked about movement and order. You're moving with that intelligence, finding that order is going to be an extraordinary experience for you. Is there anything you would add to that? I'm just sort of putting a cover over top, but there's much more in that jar, right, to take a look at. Any thoughts that will then take us out for today's interview?
Sure, it's when everything gets into sync, when everything is flowing at the same time. The image I have is a bar magnet, and you look inside the magnet, okay? As if they're cylinders. And when all those domains inside the magnet get lined up, pointing in the same direction, then the bit of metal gets magnetized, okay? That's because they're all in sync. Likewise, you know, when human intelligence gets into sync, well, when individual intelligence gets into sync with the whole of humanity's intelligence, which in turn gets into sync with nature's intelligence, which in turn, and I could go on, okay, about the planet, but if they're all in sync, then one way of experiencing that, which is a very powerful experience, is, well, people talk about being in the zone, they talk about flow, they talk about kind of mystical experience, okay, where suddenly everything's clear. I think in practice that's what's going on. I think when the different levels of our inner cosmos, okay, get into sync with each other, whether it's energetically, which it could be, whether it's at the level of intelligence, which it could be, at the level of consciousness, which it could be. I mean, ideally, Steve, it would be all of these, all three of these things, okay? But getting into sync. And as you know, when things are in sync, They're kind of on the same wavelength, all right? And when things are on the same wavelength, they can resonate. And it's that resonance that we experience. So our actual experience of knowing something or feeling something is that resonance. So when that resonance happens, because these things are in sync, we experience it as, oh, wow. So that's it. We have this kind of aha moment of awakening, if you like. Not very common. And the reason it's not common is because we're not often in sync. And I think if we were other creatures out there in nature, we'd be in sync all the time. We'd be in sync all the time. And I think that's what differentiates or distinguishes us from other creatures. They're in sync all the time, okay? With each other and with the rest of nature. We're not. When we are, we experience it as extraordinary or unusual.
So yeah, that's great, Chris. And we're getting to our time here for today. I really appreciate that last little bit around the sync and the flow and the resonance. I would certainly encourage our listeners to go back over that again and just really understand where Chris is going with that. And we'll be looking at that more as we go along. Our plans are to do something at least once a week to continue this storyline. There will be excerpts and transcripts and books available, and I think some courses will start to unfold that Chris is playing with at the moment. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out. I know I'm doing some work with children and trees, and that will resonate with what Chris is talking about. And so stay in touch with this series, the Wellther series with Chris Thomson. I think you'll find it to be quite an amazing journey that you can accompany us on. So with that, Chris, thanks very much, and take care and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Steve.